Hi, this is Eric Tonkry, Director of Marketing Education and Assistant Professor at Rutgers Business School. And it's my pleasure today to be joined by Shen Chair of the Marketing Department, Editor-in-Chief of the Rutgers Business Review, and Founding Director for the Center of Market Advantage, an interdisciplinary hub that helps businesses establish and maintain sustainable marketing strategies. Shen, to start our interview today, please share with our audience your area of expertise.
I collect data and analyze about what makes companies successful. And probably one thing that makes my research unique, I take an interfunctional approach. So I study not just marketing, but also supply chain management, and I study international business in the global environment. And I like to study innovation management, right, in terms of what types of products and when and how should be brought to markets. So basically, I take a very high-level approach to strategy, and I like to study collecting data and analyzing it of what makes a company successful.
Very good. Could you explain for our audience what is the Logistics Managers Index and how it ties into your area of expertise?
Yes, so basically one of the interesting and exciting projects that I've been involved with quite a few other researchers from other universities is the Logistics Managers Index, which is a monthly report that we collect data and we analyze and we publish every month, in the beginning of every month. And basically it tracks the logistics activity in the country in terms of inventories, in terms of warehousing activity and transportation. So basically we survey logistics managers throughout the country across multiple different industries, upstream and downstream in the supply chain context. And based on their reports, we can basically then provide a snapshot of the economic activity across all the supply chains across the United States.
Very good. And my understanding is there's a new update that's going to be published shortly, right? In your review, what are the capabilities that companies need in order to thrive in this turbulent economic environment?
Speaking of the Logistics Managers Index, obviously the economy, has been through some tough times. We've seen better days, certainly. But I have to say that the Logistics Managers Index at least indicates that we are certainly in a much better situation than we were back in April or May of 2020 when this COVID crisis started economically, and we're even better than what we were in the 2020 summer. So the activity is basically increasing right now in US, but the slower pace than it was right before the Christmas. And basically, in this environment, one thing that I can say is supply chain capabilities are certainly very important. And when I say supply chain capabilities, is the ability of one particular company to collaborate with their suppliers, exchange information, right, integrate activities, and then respond to the changes. So what is very important, obviously, today is to be able to be nimble, to be flexible, adaptable, and respond to the radical and big changes that are happening in the environment almost on a daily basis, feels like, right?
Seems to be happening at a very rapid clip. That's for certain.
Yeah, and the rate of change basically keeps increasing. That's certainly the case.
That's the thing. And how do you feel that the COVID pandemic do you think it's kind of accelerated the situation? So therefore, the companies that are not as well prepared to marshal their capabilities are really at a greater risk of failure?
What we saw is this big external shock that happened. Some companies got caught flat-footed, let's say, and couldn't adapt as quickly, right? So when we talk about global supply chains now, it's very complex interorganizational networks, basically, that we study across every single industry, right? So in the past, like 20, 30 years ago, maybe a company had more of an autonomy in terms of developing new products, improving them, changing them, putting them on the market, and so forth. But nowadays, you have to do it in collaboration with your partners. So therefore, all the strategic capabilities, dynamic capabilities that you develop, you have to take an inter-organizational approach and look at the much larger scale, because the whole supply chain has to be in tune and aligned to be able to respond to these kind of external shocks. Yeah.
What would, in order for a company to accomplish such as what you're referring to, the supply chain capabilities and so forth, on the last point, what might be the first two, let's say, constructive steps a company could do in order to put themselves on that right path?
Thing I would say is when companies make investments, right, into a new infrastructure, new IT systems, all this digitization going on and so forth, the digital transformation across many industries that we see, managers have to keep in mind that all these investments do not necessarily translate themselves directly into financial returns unless the investments are made strategically. So that is a very crucial step that we found over and over in our research, that resource investments basically have to be strategically deployed and then strategically optimized so that your investments are aligned with your supply chain partners. And this investment allows for a better communication between the supply chain partners upstream and downstream. It allows for greater activity integration, innovativeness across the board, right? And then finally, the whole supply chain needs to be able to be ready to respond to changes as quickly as possible. I'll just give you a very specific example, for example, right? So in the past, it used to be that one company can design, develop the product and put it on the market. And nowadays it's increasingly more common for multiple partners across the supply chain. So let's say a manufacturer, along with their first tier, even sometimes second tier suppliers, coming up with a new product development idea and implementing it. So we see a lot of cross-company collaboration in terms of bringing new technologies and new products to the market. And the same thing would apply even to process improvements. So basically the whole supply chain, upstream and downstream, has to be on the same page with respect to their investments, getting their infrastructure aligned and building their capabilities so that they can respond to changes.
Okay, very good, Shen. And is there a way that companies could prepare, let's say, if they're looking at it from a standpoint of a short term, let's say for the next 6 months to a year, versus more of a longer term view, which might be, let's say, year plus out, looking from, let's say, 2021?
The planning horizons used to be short in US anyway, compared to other parts of the world. So our corporations tend to be more short-term focused than long-term focused. Versus, for example, Asian companies tend to have a more long-term orientation or long-term focus, probably because of their national culture and organizational cultures. But what we saw now with this unexpected crisis that happened in 2020 is that planning horizon now is even shorter. Now we're talking about literally months. So companies basically are adapting by definitely making their investment decisions for very short-term focus and trying to save the quarter probably, or maybe the next 6 months, and then trying to be more nimble with their long-term investments. That said, there is a way to kind of have both ways, optimize both sides of short-term and long-term by making sure that your investments are adaptable, they're not too sticky. Sticky is a fancy word we use in strategy, but basically every investment that you make, right, it has a degree to stickiness to it. That means if you make an investment, let's say I built a factory, it's not that easy to basically change that factory, retool, or sell it, or redeploy those resources. So then you have to find other ways, and those ways might include outsourcing, might include, again, supply chain partnerships and alliances, joint ventures, where basically the strategy that you implement and the investments that you make are flexible, so they're more easily, let's say, redeployable. So that, if another shock happens, another unforeseen event happens in terms of risk management, you can redeploy those resources and adapt your supply chain and your organization quicker than otherwise.
Okay, very good, Shen. And last question I'd like to ask is, assuming that we'll be returning to some kind of normal later in 2021, what can corporate management do today? Let's say two things that corporate management could do today to prepare their organizations for a post-COVID environment.
And one thing that probably most of us agree on is that the digital transformation is here to stay, more or less. It's just a debate of how much of this online movement is going to stay there. For example, how much of the retail sales are going to go to brick and mortar. And the best guesses are that probably a good chunk of the online digital sales are going to stay online. So therefore, I would say this is a generalization. So it will depend on your industry, depend on your situation, your target market, and customers, obviously. But I would say that the digital transformation is probably to stay, move cloud, the implementation of machine learning systems, analytics, real-time analytics, right, in terms of your capabilities, that should be probably a priority in terms of mid to long range planning. Yeah.
Okay, very good. So then again, it's a sense that the environment has actually forced companies to really incorporate that into their environment, and so now it's a matter of them trying to maybe, becoming more, developing more of an expertise, because that is in a sense, the new normal going forward as we get further into 2021.
Developing a core competency takes years. It's not going to happen overnight, right? So some companies already have a lead time in terms of, so they are leaders in the domain of digital transformations. So they might be fully digital or mostly digital from the start. So those type of companies would definitely have an advantage going forward. So what, let's say, a brick and mortar retailer needs to do now is to try to obviously figure out how they can utilize their brick and mortar resources to serve a customer in a digital environment. And obviously that is a tough challenge for them, just as an example.
Well, thank you very much, Shen, for sharing your time and your insights today. For more information, please visit the Center for Market Advantage website, and also the Rutgers Business Review, which has insights in this and other great articles from the Rutgers Business Review. Well, thank you for watching.